Welcome to the For Everyday Leaders podcast. Brandon Faust, Alex Holt here with you today. Alex, why don't you tell us what this podcast is all about?
Yeah, this podcast is all about helping people lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life. And today on the show with us, we have Brent Freeman. Brent is the Executive Director of Camptown. He's a 2024 Indianapolis Praxis Nonprofit Fellow. He's had a previous career as a teacher, school leader, and a district administrator. He's a deacon at Redeemer Presbyterian Church in downtown Indy. Brent is married, and they have 4 amazing kids.
Brent.
That's right.
Welcome. Thanks for
Thank
hanging
you.
out with us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
You know,
Glad to be here.
Brent is one of those people that you're like, when I met him, I'm like, I feel like I should know you, but I don't know you. But we know a lot of the same people.
We do.
Such as the circle of Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And so we met because we're both in this nonprofit fellowship with the Indianapolis kind of Praxis Guild.
Right.
And it's been great. It's been fun to hang out. We went to this event. We were both kind of like, we know some people here, but we don't. Ended up hanging out. Our wives talked for a little bit. They have like similar career, which is really cool.
Yep.
And then we got to go on this retreat together, and we stayed in like the same area, the same little house, and we became buddies. At least I think we became friends.
So you stayed like in a little yurt together? Is that what I just heard?
The fish house.
The fish house.
The fish camp or the fish cabin, right?
Yeah,
Which
the fish
was,
cabin.
you know, a pretty well-appointed, garage type, second carriage house type of situation.
Pretty cool.
With hundreds of photos of kids catching fish. I think the whole family, right?
Yeah.
Had caught, and so, but yeah, we got to know each other well and share stories late and early, and it was really awesome.
It is awesome. And so, it's been really fun. I feel like we've developed a great relationship, but I've also gotten to know more about Camptown. I've gotten to know more about what's going on there, and we even actually were able to connect a friend who's been able to work there during this season, which is really cool. And I know that's been really meaningful for him. So just seeing that has been really cool, and we're just super grateful that you're here. So we're going to get into the story.
Yeah.
And Brent, tell us about where you grew up, life for you growing up, man. Where was it? What was happening? All of it, baby.
Yeah. Well, born in the metropolis of Anderson, Indiana.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a central Indiana kid, so I've really lived in Brownsburg, where we're recording here, right? In Indianapolis, really my whole life. And I've tried to leave and did for a bit after college and went and worked at Olympic National Park, but just was drawn back because this is home, right? Yeah. This is home. This is where the relationships are. This is where, I feel most connected, and the Lord has really blessed me with long-term friendships and relationships. And so that's what draws me here. And I love, about Indy that it's a small, big town. Yeah. And so this place has in many ways shaped me. Right. And hopefully I can be a small part of shaping it. Right. And I think, so I grew up, maybe something unique of my childhood is, public school and private Christian school kind of mixed in. But I went to 4 elementary schools, really in just kind of a unique anomaly of family moving this, and the other. But it helped me learn how to build new relationships as well, even at a young age, right? And so 4 different elementary schools in 5-6 years, I think has equipped me in many ways to continue, entering new spaces and being able to build relationships, now as an adult. So, grew up in, a two-parent household, 1 sister, have a lovely nephew and niece that are in town as well. Cool. And so in addition to my 4, sometimes get together with those 5, 6. And so that's a little bit about my childhood.
Where did this inflection point of nature, because it's one thing if you're like grow up in Utah or Colorado or Montana or things like that. Where now we were just talking about it's the fall season, right? There's some beautiful little pockets around here and all this stuff. But where did that, because that really ends up tying later on into the story to Camptown and all that kind of stuff. But where did that kind of experiences, was that in your childhood? Was that later in life?
Sure.
And talk a little bit about that before we talk about kind of those post-high school sort of years, if you will.
Yeah. So, I think grew up at summer camp. My father was a professional Boy Scouter, right? And so he ran their outdoor programs. For 6 years of my childhood, we lived on camp. And so we would move out of our house, May, June, and move down to camp. And that was a couple different places. One up near Elwood, Indiana, and then for 4 summers down on Lake Monroe in near Bloomington to Randsburg Scout Reservation. And so those were years, I think, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 kind of range for me. Very formative years in terms of a love for creation and a love just being outside and, having a childhood with, free play, exploring, looking for the little frogs and the crinoids and, the geodes down on Monroe Banks and, picking blackberries and riding horses. And, they set us up one summer with this sort of wooden fort. And I think partially so they could get us out of the office and get some stuff done, right?
Right.
But then also, gave us a play space outside there. And so for my sister and I, it was just endless imagination and, fun. And I was a part of Boy Scouts as well. And I think that contributed to the shaping and enjoyment of the outdoors. Yeah. But
I think what's so fascinating about listening to that is, and I mean this in like the kindest way possible, but I feel like I'm sitting here listening to my grandpa talk about his childhood, right? Like running around. And I think that's so not common in our generation in growing up, right? So many of us grew up more in a suburban context. We didn't have that space to explore outside, or if we did, it was riding our bikes through the neighborhood to friend's house, but it wasn't playing along the riverbank picking blackberries. Like, I think that's just such a unique, you probably learned so many unique things in that context growing up.
Yeah, and without knowing it, right? So different than being in school and, here sitting this row and I thrived in that sort of an environment. But I think I also had the sort of city living, right? And so it was this contrast. And so I'm thankful for that. And that did shape a love for the outdoors. And, as I got into high school and post-high school, very formative, trip that a leader at my high school, coach and teacher, took a number of us on upon graduation, 2 weeks, 6 national parks, road trip, Yosemite and more, backpacking, Half Dome, seeing some of the most beautiful parts of our country. And, and my parents had done some of that as well. And so there was always a love for the outdoors as a place of solace, peace, communion with, the Lord and of formation, really. And so,
that's awesome.
What ended up happening, kind of the educational path post high school? You've got this great experience with nature and formative and all that, but kind of what did those next steps look like in saying, this is what I'm going to do with my life during that time, at least?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've always joked I'm kind of on a 1-year contract with God. Like, I'm like, what's next? And try to discern calling and discern path in these ways. But, in undergrad, I was pursuing a career in sport. And so we were talking about the Pacers, this morning, and thought maybe I'll work pro sports, Pacers, or, high school sports, this, that, and the other. But went and worked at a summer camp, at Deerfoot Lodge in the Adirondacks of New York, and just a beautiful part of our country. And really, I think in that moment, felt a sense of calling. Okay, I should work with kids, and I should do it in this type of environment. At that point, it was far enough into my college career, it was not the right time to change major, do something, And so ended up kind of tweaking my final year to pursue career in that way. And then I went and worked at Olympic National Park and thought maybe I'll stay out west and do, see what the Lord has for me out here. But in that period of time, a friend introduced me to the previous executive director at Camptown. Said, my cousin has this interesting organization. It's in Indianapolis. It works with urban kids. They go outdoors. How have you never heard of it? And it was just this kind of providential alignment that occurred. And so I had a phone interview back, little cell phones with the, QWERTY texting back in the day. I'm sitting on the porch, barely service, interview, good conversation. Okay, let's try this. And so, the Lord had prearranged all of that, right, before. And then as my wife and I got married and we're having kids and, we're committed to our church and the ministries there, it made less sense to be on the road traveling and leading trips, which is what I was doing, 55 nights 1 year that I led trips. Wow. And so pursued public education and got into special education as a teacher and then as a school administrator. And so I would have never predicted that path.
Yeah.
And it's been cool to see where, there's been parts of that journey that have led me back to places. And so,
yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah. So as you look at that part of your journey, what would you say has been one of those top formative moments in that trajectory from growing up, suburban living the camp life, through college and then into that career world? What's been something that's been just a really formative thing for you?
Yeah. I definitely think back to the time at Deerfoot Lodge as a very young person, first exposure into kind of that working in the outdoor space and in a intentional ministry role. But as a young teacher, I mean, I was always and a young administrator, it felt like I was always tapped, and said, can you do this? Can you do more? Can you become an ambassador for the teaching fellowship that you're a part of? Or, can you take on leading this school, which happened for me at a pretty young stage in my career, pretty young in my teaching career, and, had the opportunity to lead a school in the Meadows neighborhood of Indianapolis, which is, the school was 98% African-American. It was a school for high school dropouts. And so it was a dropout recovery model, very innovative, and we were in at the ground floor back about 2011. It was the third school of its type, and now they're in 10 states, and there's 15 of these in Indiana, and we were able to do some really amazing things as a team in terms of graduation rate and allowing a number of adults to come back and earn a high school diploma. And for me, it was trial by fire, right? And so it's very formative. It caused me to learn a lot about myself, my leadership style, how to rely on the Lord for provision, how to rely on people around me, and kind of build up leaders and invest in the team. And so I think those were very formative years for me. And I think helped me to see I don't have to know how it's going to go to take the next step. I don't have to know how it's going to end up. I don't even have to necessarily feel equipped at the moment. But to take those steps in faith, this seems right. Yes, let's do it. And let's take that next step and, do what's right in front of me and do it well. And that has seemed to be, a way that, leadership opportunities then have found me or been brought to me.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of times that story usually seems more common than the person that's like, I want the positional title. Yeah. Right. Like, I just want to go after it. These opportunities where you kind of feel like you're under the crucible and the crushing and the pressing of a moment or a trial or a situation where you're like, I don't really know how we're going to do this. How do we get here? And then what I know of you is Brent is a very calm person. And like, what I also enjoy about Brent, and this is probably why these opportunities have come, is Brent is one of the few people I know, in my life at least, that really does seek to listen first. And there's times where I'm like, all right, Brent, I want you to say something more here. And I know, because when you do, it's like it's just like dripping in wisdom of things from your experiences, but just wisdom in general, And so what's kind of been one of those, you get to hear me a lot and you hear others a lot, but we want to hear from you. What's an everyday leadership principle that you've kind of carried with you, through these different, ebbs and flows and changes in your life and career, but also kind of still having pretty common thread of like serving young people and all that kind of stuff. So what's maybe a everyday leadership principle you've carried with you?
I'll pay you later for the kind words, by the way. So thank you.
I know, man. I mean it. It's so easy to say because it's so true.
Sweet. That's sweet of you. I appreciate the encouragement. I would say to lead others, leadership's an interesting word, right? And I think, my understanding of the root of leadership is really about sacrifice. Yeah. That isn't what the maybe cultural definition tends to portray about leadership, but leadership as sacrifice is an interesting concept, so to lead others is to sacrifice for others, right? And I think to lead others well, you must first lead yourself well. Yeah. And I think of the greatest commandment is love the Lord our God. The second is love your neighbor as yourself. Neighbor love comes out of self love, and you can love self too much and too little, but must lead self well, love self, love other, and so there's a right ordering of these things that has to happen to be able to lead others. And I think, it starts with how do we orient our own thinking about ourselves so that we can show up right for others, show up rightly for others. And I think at my healthiest, right, I am reminding myself of the truths that allow me to go and be an encouragement, a blessing, whatever, to other people, right, or a challenge to other people, which is, one thing we get to do a lot in the Camptown space, but it's challenge people, but it has to come from a healthy place of because I love you, because I respect you, because you're capable of more, like let me help call that out of you. But I would say it starts with rightly ordering that. Love God, love self, love others. Yeah. And
I think there's so much that we unfortunately see in leaders who go through public failure, that as you start to dig into those stories, you see that there is a misordering of that. There is not a love of self. There's not a care for self. And then that boils over. I think we talk about on the podcast a lot that we live fully integrated lives. Our work and our personal life and our spiritual life, they're not separate. Right. It's all one thing that's connected together. And so when one of those is out of balance and out of order, when you have those priorities out of order, it naturally is going to overflow and disrupt everything else downstream.
That's right. And regardless, we've said this before on the show, but like regardless of like your positional title that you do or don't have, regardless of where you work or what sector, or if you're a stay-at-home parent, this integrated life thing is such a big deal. And that loving of self, like it shows up. I know that in this era and season of life, I think for all three of us, with having kids in the house, our spouses are working another job, and it's just like, and then we've got the things going on in our work or other ministry things or things that are on our heart. And you're like, how does this all work? How does this all fit? Yeah. And oftentimes with people, there becomes this accidental false humility and not taking care of yourself. Yep. And I know that's something I've bumped into over the years, where you're like, if I'm not loving myself well, then really there's not much to flow out to other people, right? Yeah. Or if I'm not communing with the Lord as I should, as I desire and want to, that these things start breaking down a little bit, and living a holistic, integrated life, a life of worship, as we work, as we love our families, as we are involved in the community, all those kinds of things. Often what gets sacrificed is that, one, communing with God, and two, loving ourselves well and letting that be an overflow, to the lives of others.
Yeah, for sure. So Brent, continue us on that journey, right? We get into the education space. How do you end up back where you're at now doing what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the short answer is providential, right? I mean, I think it's hard to explain it in other ways. But yeah, there's, I guess I'll hit a couple of highlights of that, which was, in 2020, I was, among other things, in Indianapolis Public Schools and leading a coronavirus task force, and, a pandemic response task force, even before it had hit the United States, and convening stakeholders and preparing for, what we all know has changed the trajectory of a generation, perhaps, right? And was realizing too, and in hindsight, experiencing some burnout with elements of what that entailed, and so had stayed in touch with the previous leader of Camptown, and so for 15 years or so, we had stayed connected at various points, and actually had discussed a succession plan in around 2015, and both met a few times and prayed about it and decided this isn't the right timing for us to do this. But in 2020, a lot of things aligned for it to make sense, and so we arranged that. He brought kind of the board together in a way that made sense to them, and it worked out for me to come back and learn with him and from him for a period of time, and then take over the leadership of the organization in 2021, and so I'm so thankful because it allowed me to learn with him, from him, but also carry in a number of experiences that are very valuable from public education and working in both the charter sector and the public school sector. And Brandon, to your point, I mean, most of the through line has been working with urban kids and young adults, and in educational and developmental experiences for them. And I get to, in this vocational role, integrate my passion and love for the outdoors. Yeah. And so it's like some days I'm out hiking, I'm out backpacking. I'm like, this is work. Yeah. This is amazing, right? And there are, as with any professional role, the parts that are less desirable, right? But I often pinch myself. I was canoeing with some staff and saying, this is a work day for us. We're hiking, down to the cave at McCormick's Creek, admiring the beauty, but also there's been some transformation down there with regard to a tornado that recently, devastated that park. But, saying this is our job. We get to, open kids' eyes to some beauty and some things inside of themselves and in their peers that they didn't know beforehand. So, but that's how it came about. And, in fact, I'm kind of, as we're sitting here recording this, I'm glad to be here, but I'm like, we have a group at Shade State Park today and, Eagle Creek this morning. And, I'm thinking, gosh, I may, be a good day to be out there with them. Yeah,
absolutely.
With
it's a perfect fall day, man.
Right. The Leafs at peak. Amazing. And so really thankful that the circumstances worked to return, to Camptown.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think there's so much in that about the, maintaining relationships, right? That connection that you had kept to that place, about leaving somewhere well, about staying invested in those relationships that ultimately, like, the Lord has honored and turned around in that. And I think there's also so much in so many stories we've had about how wild of a year 2020 was, but yet the amazing things I think that God has kind of opened up in a lot of people's lives through that. It was like this lifting of a veil and this start of something new for so many people. And so I think it's just amazing to kind of see all those things collide in that same moment for you.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, very, very true. And I think, I've returned to 2 former places of employment, right, at different points. And so to your point, like, leave well and, like, honor these relationships. At the end of the day, that's, the most important piece of our human interaction is like that And so, well said.
Brent, what's one thing you'd encourage our listeners with about everyday leadership?
One thing, I would say, pursue your understanding of your calling. I think when acquiring leadership or pursuing leadership becomes a goal or an aim in and of itself, it's ripe for distortion. And but pursue your calling and try to understand, from the Lord and from people who know and love, you well, what were you made to do, right? What are you made to do in this season? It can change, right? Various seasons bring, various different callings. And you already mentioned, as a parent, that's one of a more primary calling, right? As a spouse, right? Even more so. And I think vocationally, absolutely true. Then leadership comes, right? And it's from an authentic place, opposed to, some, artificial place. That's good. So pursue your calling.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. So Brent, a book or a podcast that's impacted you, and I'm going to add something here because I also love national parks. Okay. I need to know, what is your favorite national park in this list? So a book or podcast that's impacted you and your favorite national park.
Well, I got to start with the park then, because just last week we visited Arches National Park for the first time as a family, which was such a gift. And my first time there, it probably doesn't crack my top 5. Okay. That's fair. But I loved it.
Yep. It's a beautiful park.
Beautiful park. Yeah. Yosemite for me is number 1. Yep. And I've only been twice, but both times were incredible, and stayed for multiple days in the park. And, and so, Half Dome is a sort of life list hike, to get on top of Half Dome and see that. And then all the views from the valley. We also hiked up, both of the falls and did some backpacking up behind the falls, and, all the history and, the kind of even the story of the national parks growing comes really through Yosemite and Muir and Roosevelt and others. And El Cap and, what's happened recently with Free Solo and Alex Honnold. And, it's an amazing place. Yeah. You see the granite monoliths, it stirs something deep inside. Yeah. And so Yosemite's number one for me.
That's a good one.
Man, I'd jump on that too. I've been there twice, and it's one when I was like 19 and like backpacked with some buddies, and then my wife and I went actually right before we had kids. It was amazing, just so cool, and like it's endless, right? Like it's vast. Literally endless of how you could kind of take on Yosemite either as a family or if you're more aggressive and want to go backpacking and rough it and all that kind of stuff. So
that's awesome. Right. Yeah, our family stayed in Curry Village, which is their tent village, right? Their permanent tent village. The last time we went, and my kids still talk. I mean, they're talking about that regularly. That's the best trip I've ever had. And we visit a lot of the parks. Like my boys have each visited more than a dozen parks.
Okay. Wow. That's awesome.
And so very fun. Book or podcast? I would say lately I've been sharing about things I've learned in The Anxious Generation, which is a Jonathan Haidt book. And whether or not you're familiar, he talks about the causation of mental health, adolescent mental health decline, right? So a rise in depression, anxiety, and self-harm that is really caused by proliferation of social media and smartphone and kind of ubiquitous access to smartphone, social media, and these things. And, we see that, right, at Camptown. We see that. I see it, sort of the temptation towards that in many adults, right? And I see it with my own kids trying to make wise parenting decisions, now having a teenager and, preteen and these things. And so that book has, in many ways, affirmed the things we do to help kids, right? And sort of disconnect, unplug, get out, have free play and these developmental experiences. And I think, it could end up being the thing like tobacco was for the generation 20, 30, 40 years ago, where we see this awakening of its negative health impacts, but how it was so, proliferated so quickly and is such about capturing the attention of young minds and warping in some ways that. The other book I've been reading lately is more of a, I guess, in the leadership category of Dream Manager. And, it's really about helping people in your care, in your supervision to pursue their vocational dreams and their personal dreams. And just as an encouragement for me in leading people towards a bigger picture than, just perhaps what the job is that there is in front of them. And so that's been a good read lately too.
That's good. That's so good. I think I read that shortly after it came out, maybe 3 or 4 years ago or something. Okay. And that book does kind of propel that idea of how do we steward every environment, steward every relationship that we're a part of. And I think a lot of times what happens in leadership, whether you work at a church, whether you work at a business, whether you work at a small business, whether you work at a nonprofit, is, people don't want to lose their people.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
But then the statement's flawed, so they're like, those aren't your people, They ain't yours. And right. And so helping, and there's healthy stories of that, and there's not so healthy stories of that too, of just like encouraging people as they see themselves more rightly. Employment is actually an opportunity for spiritual formation, leadership development, personal development, discovering dreams, because we say in our life mapping process, it might produce actually a life-changing success story of things that they like and are good at. And I think that is such an important thing of like, how do I steward this opportunity and relationship well? Because to your point, in your career, you've left places, and then there's been, because of that stewardship and relationship on probably all parties, it's been like, come back. Come back into this role. Or, man, we could consider Brent for something. That Brent's a great guy. We know what he's like and his skills and all that stuff. And I think that is such a big deal. And I think that Dream Manager book really does help kind of propel that ideation of like, what do people want to be doing? You know, what really matters to them. And I think at the same time, this whole purpose paradigm thing, don't get me started, but like it's okay to have a 9-to-5 that you need to pay the bills or have a career or you have skills in it, but it doesn't fulfill all your purpose. That's okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because there's other things that it creates a platform for you to go express purpose in your home, in your neighborhood, in your community in a different way, or there's maybe something else that you get moving and starting with. And so I think that those kind of resources, whether you're in a seat of leadership or not yet, I think it's really important to have your eyes on that to say, hey, when maybe I am in that, or even how am I leading up in those kind of conversations and around me in that way. So that's a great book. I would recommend getting your hands on it.
And I would say too, there's something in that, going back to what you said about pursuing your calling and that stewardship of that pursuit, because I think as you look at your career journey, coming back to these places, you're in new roles in those places, and it wasn't the right time for you to be in those roles when you left. Right. And so the pursuit of that calling and the continuation of discovering your unique calling and your unique purpose, and then stewarding that journey well, I think has allowed you to land back in some places that you've brought other skills, you've learned other things. Right. And I think that's something really valuable for all of us. And it may not be right now, but the stewardship and the pursuit of that is so critical for the long game and for the future, and not just the right now moments that we find ourselves in.
Absolutely.
That's right. And it's hard to anticipate what 10, 20 years from now holds, right? But when we can operate in a way that sets up 10 or 20 years well, that's a good thing. And, I think Praxis, Brandon, where we've connected and spent a lot of time together in the last year, has helped me try to stand more on the balcony and view things from a kingdom mindset, opposed to being just on the dance floor and sort of what's the next move or two or three moves. And I think that's an important kind of shift. And hopefully, as I'm getting older, more gray hair, that sort of thing happens more naturally, but Praxis has been a blessing in that way for me. And I think it fits in with the theme you guys are pointing out.
Yeah,
that's good.
So how can people find Camptown, get involved with what you're doing? Tell us a little bit more about Camptown. Tell us ways that people can kind of get connected into that, whether that is in a volunteer role, whether that is in a donation partnership role, whether that is in maybe employment in the future, those kinds of things. Just talk us a little through Camptown and some ways people can get connected and where they can find you.
Thank you. Yeah, Camptown is a youth development organization, started out of a church in Carmel in 1991. And in that time has served over 60,000 kids through outdoor adventure programs. And this year, in our largest year yet of impact, we will have interacted with over 6,000 kids, including a pretty neat partnership with Indianapolis Public Schools as they've reorganized middle schools and have relaunched 7 middle schools in their district. We've also launched this year adventure therapy, where there's a clinical mental health integration into our outdoor adventure programming. We really do specialize in working with urban kids and exposing, in many cases for the first time, kids to developmental experiences in the outdoors. And so as mentioned, we have a group overnight tonight, Shade State Park. We have a group out at Eagle Creek today doing a team compass challenge. And those are a couple of examples of the types of activities and programs that Camptown facilitates. And so there are a number of ways people could get involved. You hit them, Brandon, which is, volunteer, donate. We are primarily funded through philanthropy, through the generosity of people with whom our mission resonates, right? And then, we currently don't have staff roles available, but we are always looking to meet great people who are interested in the work that we're doing. And that could mean, on a committee role, in a volunteering with youth. It could mean, future board member or something in those ways. And the best way for people to find us is online, which is at camptown.org, one word, just as it sounds. And then also on social media to see snapshots of what we're up to. And so that's at Camptown Indy on most of the social platforms.
And my daughter, who was at a camp, actually got to come and spend part of a day in a Camptown activity, and it was one of the highlights of her summer. Between that and roller skating, those were the two. Those were the two.
That's right.
Those were the two. And so she, she went canoeing, and she's 8 years old, and this was really. I mean, she'd been in a boat and stuff before, but we've never really been in she's never been canoeing. Mm-hmm. We've done kind of the boats that you pedal and all that stuff before. So she was like, Dad, I went canoeing. This was so cool, blah, 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 awesome. Blah, blah. And so, I mean, firsthand, can attest to that work. But I mean, so much of the work, and we've had some overlap with some of the groups we've worked with in the past that are now doing some things, and just hearing how exciting the lift that's given those kids and those organizations that are serving and partnering in those kind of experiences is really, really powerful, man.
That's right. Yeah. And we have some long-term programs within Camptown where we know kids 5-6 years, and we're really working on their long-term development holistically. And we're glad to talk with you more about what Wayfinders is doing and some of your, identity mapping and life mapping work that I think is special. And like our friends, at Elevate Indy have seen the impact with their kids. At Camptown, we're eager to learn more about how we can bring some of that in with our youth leaders. Yeah, so
I think it's exciting. I love it because there is something at any age that when you get out in nature, that like life slows down a bit. You can think and process a little bit more, and the opportunities for kids in general, but particularly the kids that you're serving, to have that opportunity maybe for one of the first times in their life is really meaningful. It's really powerful in their human development and their mental health and all that. So man, I'm grateful that our town, like our city, has something like Camptown to serve kids, serve families, and then also what you're cultivating in a culture there of people living out their mission, their purpose, right? And the dots that have connected for you in your career story arc, how in the near term and long term is that happening for the people in and around, whether they're volunteers on the board, on the staff. It's really, really powerful, man.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you. Yeah, we're grateful to get to do what we do. I think just a quick story of, that reminds me at times of we'll have a kid in a van from, an elementary school, and they're on a Saturday field trip, and they're driving out to one of the state parks. Maybe they're on Highway 74, not far from where we're recording here. And they'll be looking out and they'll say, "What's that?" And we say, "Oh, that's a cornfield." And they haven't, in some cases, some of the youth we're serving haven't been out of the city, right? Or they haven't seen even that, right? And so we're thrilled to get to do what we get to do and come alongside kids and in their childhood. And so it's a real privilege.
It's awesome. Well, we want to say thanks for tuning into this episode of the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast by Wayfinders. We hope it helps you lead in the everyday spaces and moments of life.
Yeah, and we would love for you to continue to join us on the journey by subscribing to the 4 Everyday Leaders podcast. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Brent, thank you so much for joining us today.
We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks, gentlemen.